Well, good morning. Most of you at this point know who I am. I'm Sarah Barsker. I'm the Candidacy and Psychological Assessment Coordinator for GBHEM, aka your UMCares guru. I always joke that I can't always help, but I'm always happy to try. So you can always give me a call, even if you're not sure if it's in my purview, and we can figure it out usually together or figure out who I need to refer you to. So today we're going to just go over essentially the psychological assessment track and how that relates for candidates, and then we're going to switch and see how that is viewed by the MAS and kind of how they go about accessing the psychological assessment battery to do their reviews. So starting off, the psychological assessment process, and this is for candidates or anyone who's doing the non-traditional or a retake, which sometimes when you call in, you're saying, I need to do a psychological assessment for someone who's already had one, or they're coming in from another denomination and we just need a psych battery, I'll refer you to that other track. The only difference between these two tracks is that the non-traditional retake includes a fee for the battery. So there's a step to be able to pay that fee. Otherwise, they're the exact same. So, as most of you know, since about December last year, all of the psychological assessment battery is now completed online. So there's no more paper packets being sent out to anyone, there's no more bubble sheets, it's all done online, the entire battery. I still get questions from people saying they requested their assessment packet and nothing has come in the mail, and then when I tell them it was emailed to them, they're astounded. So just so you know, if you hear from any of your mentors, I haven't gotten my battery, it's probably in their email. And then also, in turn, there's no more packets mailed to MASs. They're able to actually extract all of the battery pieces off of UMCares. So this is just kind of a visual of the entire process. As you can see, there's lots of steps. The first two boxes there, those are what I call the pre-work completed by the candidate. The first one is where the MAS is selected, and then that's kind of the pre-work done by the candidates, the PDI, the release of information, and the references. Gerald, yeah. Use the microphone, we're recording.
I was wondering if we can get that, is that going to be printed out, or where do we get this chart?
This is actually available on the BOM library page for this event. This whole presentation is. And this video will be recorded and posted after the session. But then you can see that then the mentors request the assessment packets, GBHEM will email those out, and then they actually take the assessment the candidate takes the assessment in the presence of the mentor, and then GBHEM is notified that the assessments have been completed, and I upload those, send those off to the MASs, who review them, and then mark it as completed. That kind of wraps up the entire process in a nutshell. So timeline, this is another question I get often. How quickly do things go out? So once an assessment materials is requested by the mentor, it usually takes 2 to 3 business days. I wrote days, but it's business days for the mentor or proctor to receive the assessment links. That is because it is not automatic. That is still sent manually by me. So I do get that question often. I requested it at 10 a.m. this morning. Why don't I have them? Because I'm not a miracle worker. So it does take a few days. That's just one thing to keep in mind. Even though it is much faster than it used to be, it's not instantaneous. The same goes for uploading the assessment reports like the MMPI-2 and the 16PF. Those are not linked from Pearson directly into UMCares. I manually upload those, so it takes a few days. But the day that I upload it, there's no delay between when I upload it and when I notify the MAS that they're available. That is 99.9% of the time the same day that you'll be notified everything is ready. So typically it takes about 3 days after the assessment is completed for the MAS to be notified that the battery is ready for their review. So the first step of the psychological assessment track is assigning the MAS. Really want to highlight about this because it's actually done a little bit different between the different annual conferences. Sometimes the candidate selects the MAS, sometimes that's selected for them by the annual conference. The main thing about this is the MASs will actually get a notification right at this point through their email that they have been selected. This doesn't mean that everything is ready for them to review. It just is a heads up, you've been selected to do a review. The release of information is what we were talking about yesterday, which is essentially the candidates saying this, we agreed to let this information be used and that it will be sent out to the MAS. This is actually required before they can move on to any other step in the psychological assessment track. And also, if this step is not completed and somehow they circumvented that, you will not be able to access, the MAS will not be able to access any of the assessment battery pieces until this is completed. It will actually lock all the other documents. The PDI, or the Personal Data Inventory, this is a form you're all familiar with, but the few things about it in UMCares that I want to highlight, it's very long. And if you're familiar with UMCares, you know what that means. So I highly encourage the candidates to quick save often. And part of the reason that I say that is because there's so much information they may get in there and they'll find they need to go out and find more information. And that's not a problem if they continue to quick save. They should not submit, though, until they are completely sure that everything in there is completed and done correctly, because once it's submitted, it's locked. I can't reopen it. The only way we can reopen the PDI is actually to reset the step, and then everything that's been submitted up until that point will be wiped out. The references form is another area where we get lots of questions from candidates. This is where they can actually put in their personal professional references and issue their own self-assessment. This is the 360 references that we were referring to yesterday. Candidates can actually monitor the progress of their references by looking on this screen. Once they are submitted, the box where it says name will actually turn gray, and they'll no longer be able to resend out that invitation. However, if they have a reference who's saying, I didn't receive it, I need it resent, they can just check that box that's send receive email next to that person's name, resubmit the form, it'll reissue an email. Patricia, microphone.
I know one of the references has to be a pastor. We do find that the references from personal friends and family are not as helpful because they're always just positive, you know? Is there any possibility in the future for designating that at least 2 of them would be professional or church-related?
Meg, do you want to talk to that? Okay.
We do give instructions for who the references should be. The references are self-selected.
I know.
Maybe give stronger instructions.
So it's really important that the candidates are monitoring the progress of their references, because that will actually delay their ability to get their assessment interview if they're not staying on top of this step. And if they don't receive adequate number of references, you'll be sitting there, the MASs will be sitting there reaching out to the candidate saying, I don't have everything. The self-assessment in this step also seems to trick candidates sometimes. They don't realize that it's actually in their email. So that's something else, Boom members, to keep in mind, that candidates need to go to their email to access their self-assessment for the references. It is not a form in UMCares directly. It's a specific link emailed to them.
Sarah,
Yes.
when we do the check to, say, resubmit, who's it coming from? Is it coming from notifications at UMCares?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so we can tell them notify. Has anybody told you, well, I've had some of my candidates in Louisiana say that the person did it, but for whatever reason, it didn't gray out. And then they went back in later, and I don't know if they didn't follow the directions or whatever. I just want to know if anybody's had that problem so that I can then coach them if it happens again.
Yes, and 90% of the time when someone says they've done the reference and they don't know why it's not showing as submitted, they did not do all of the areas of growth and all the strengths. They did 3 out of the 5 or 2 out of the 5, especially for areas of growth. People are hesitant to put 5. It is required that they fill out all 5. Otherwise, it will not submit. So they may click the submit button, but then nothing happens and they just assume it's submitted and it did not actually submit.
If you just put none, would that work?
So the question was, if you just put none or not applicable, it will recognize it if any text is in that field. It doesn't have any checks for if you're writing no or none or non-applicable. I've seen quite a few that actually put NA into the last 2.
Another tip, because we have a lot with the same problem, John Ed, and it's often that they've saved it, but they didn't actually hit submit.
Yeah.
I had a candidate who is primarily Spanish language, and
Yes.
I don't know if it's available in Spanish for the self-assessment.
I actually do not know that off the top of my head.
Okay,
But I can follow up and look into that.
I took it out and translated it for her and gave it to her manually, so I have the data, but I can't put it in, but I'll use it in my report. But still, it would be nice for those, particularly in our region.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and that is something I will follow up on because we do try to offer all the other steps in Spanish, and it's important that this one is also available. The next step is the assessment packet request. This is where the mentor or the proctor will actually request assessment materials. And I say the mentor or the proctor because that could be different people. Now, since we went digital, all proctors of the psychological assessment need to also be added into UMCares as a mentor and assigned to this candidate so they can access the later steps. So then, when you actually open up this screen, you can see you select a responsible mentor. That's where you would choose the proctor's name. This isn't giving different people security rights, but what it does is it tells me who I need to send the assessment materials to. And a lot of times when there's a mentor or a proctor who's saying, I didn't receive my materials, it's because they selected the home mentor instead of the proctor from this screen, so it went to the wrong person. Which is not a problem, I'll just forward it on to them, but this is where they really need to select it. And this is also where they would select if they want English or Spanish. If you need a Korean MMPI-2, you have to email me at this point. That's simply because the rest of the battery isn't available in Korean. It's just the MMPI-2, so that's a little bit of an exception. So this is also within that same request assessment materials step. This assist files is very important. It is the instructions for and the script for the proctor to actually proctor the psychological assessment in a way that it's intended to be used. Now, I will point out, it says digital at the end. Your proctor should be using the digital version. I still get phone calls saying, it says you're gonna mail me something. There's another file in there that says paper. That's only to be used if they're using the Korean MMPI-2 at this point. Because that's actually a paper assessment. It's not available online. So that's the only difference. That's the only case you would want to use the paper one at this point. Before we had the paper one, if they had an old packet, but those old paper packets that have been mailed out to people from a year or 2 years ago, they can't be used anymore. So then the monitor's agreement. This is one of the forms that used to be filled out on paper and pencil. It's now built into the psychological assessment track. And this is where the proctor would go ahead and do that agreement. It's important, though, that the monitor or the proctor not do this until they're ready to start the psychological assessment process. The reason is this will unlock the incomplete sentence blank, which is the next step, for the candidate. And UMCares will notify them saying they have available step to work. So you don't want them jumping the gun, logging in and doing it, say, a week before, because we'll have to reset it and they'll have to do it again in a proctored setting.
Is there a warning on that tells?
There are 9 warnings before they start. And we've been doing the online version for about 11 months, so we're just shy of a year. I've had one candidate jump ahead and do it. I don't know how they missed the 9 warnings, but it does happen. The very last step in the psychological assessment track that is worked by the proctor and candidate is this monitor testing situation report. This is done by the proctor. This is the number one reason why assessment packets are delayed at this point. This has to be done after all the testing is completed for the day. This should include any useful information about if there was an internet interruption, if the candidate recently had a death in the family, anything that might influence the testing results. It should also include any interesting information for the MAS, such as the candidate wanted to use headphones and listen to music during their assessment, which, by the way, is permitted. But it should be noted on this testing situation report. And I've had some MASs request you even include what they were listening to. It helps them in the assessment interview process really get some introductory questions. It helps them get to know them a little bit better. So then at this point, GBHM would actually upload the materials, and then so GBHM gets notified by the third-party vendors that the materials are ready, and then I would actually go and upload those into the MAS portal. At that point, I would mark this step, the request assessment materials step, as sent to mentor. This is how you would know if the materials are still in progress or if they've actually been sent off. Is that request assessment material step is the final step that will be updated. Now granted, that's 4 steps up. That's not the very last step. But this will also close the track. So this is something I hear all the time. If the track still says in progress, that means there's no steps to be worked, that means there's something wrong with the assessment packet and we're waiting for an additional piece and it has not been sent off to the MAS. If that's the case, I will email the mentor saying, hey, there's a piece missing. I usually give it a little bit of time because sometimes there's issues online and they end up actually printing out the documents, mailing them in, like the testing situation report and things like that. So I give it a little bit of time, but I try not to wait too long because I know it's tying up their process. So we're going to switch over to the MAS portal. And for many of the BOM members in the room, you don't actually get to see this, so this may be your first glance behind the curtain. For the MASs in the room, when you first log into UMCares, one of the most important things you'll see is actually your main menu bar. And it's way at the very top, so it's actually pretty easy to miss. But this is where you can go back to your home page. This is where you can go to your profile if you need to update any of your information. And this is also where you can click the search button to search for a candidate if for some whatever reason they're not showing up on your list. So the list of reviews that you're going to be using as an MAS will actually be on your home screen on the left-hand side. Now this MAS active reviews, this only shows you ones that you have not marked as completed. And I get questions from MASs all the time. This list is crazy long. How do I make it shorter? I'll show you that at the end. But that's because you haven't marked a review as complete. So this should be the ideal place for you to go to open up the assessments. If you click just directly on their name, it'll take you straight to their review. The other place that you can go to is actually within the MAS's profile. If you click on your name at the very top in that main menu bar, which mine is fake MAS. If you were to click on your name and then you would click on contacts and lists from your profile sections, which will open up on the left-hand side of your screen, then it would actually open up this third screen that you're seeing. You'll see your contacts, which those are people related to you within the annual conference. And then you'll see your MAS review users. This is not only your active reviews. This is anybody that's ever been assigned to you as you've been assigned as the MAS. So if you accidentally mark someone as completed and you need to go back and make it incomplete, you can do that by going to this screen. So after finding the person, it will take you to a screen with these review items. So that left-hand menu will change to review items. This is how you would actually see all of the different pieces of the battery. You can open up the release of information, print that out for your records. You can also do the same with the PDI. Now, a note about the PDI, it does not print pretty. This has actually been an ongoing project with GCFA, is how to get this to print where it's a little easier to read. But at this time, we're aware it doesn't print super well. We are working on it. So the personal professional references within the MAS portal, there's two main ways to view it. You can view each individual reference, and this is where you would also be able to see the open-ended questions at the end. Or you can do the side-by-side view, which shows a grid of each question and how all of the references responded. This is helpful for finding an outlier, so that way you're not clicking back and forth, how did they respond? This is also how a lot of people get aggregate information, is using this view. Oh, one thing about this view, if they did not respond, every single answer will show as 0. So that's confused some MASs before, because they said, well, there's a number in the side-by-side. If all of them are 0, they haven't done it yet. Also, you can see that some of the references are in gray. Well, actually, all but one are in gray. That means they have not been completed. Only the one that's in black for the MASs is completed. You can also print out the monitor's agreement for your records. It's not really anything fancy you have to do with that. The only thing to note about this for the MASs is this will tell you who the proctor was, because it'll be the proctor's information, not necessarily the mentor's information. It'll also give you the date and the time of when they did the assessment. You can print out the incomplete sentence blank, which, as you can see, it'll give you the first half of the sentence. The second half will be typed into the next column. It also includes those 3 people that inspired them. The testing situation report is also able to be printed out, and this is where you would go to find out those interesting information about the situation when they were testing. Did they listen to music? Had they had a death in the family? So on and so forth. Most importantly, the resources section. This is actually where I will put the MMPI-2 into 16PF. They will be uploaded into the system. Also, if for whatever reason the monitor testing situation report and complete sentence blank, one of those did not work online, maybe they had someone proctor that they didn't actually assign as a mentor in UMCares, rather than sending a candidate home, they just printed out the paper version to fill out those forms. It happens. We can deal with it. Those forms will be scanned and attached into the resources section. So as an MAS, if you're notified that all pieces are ready and you see that the monitor's agreement and complete sentence blank or testing situation report are not complete, more than likely you should just go to the resources section. They're probably uploaded. This will also happen sometimes with references. Very, very rarely do we make an exception for a reference that they can fill it out by paper, but it does happen. If that is the case, then it will be scanned and uploaded into this resources section. So we talked about removing people from your active list on your home screen. At the very, very top of every single one of those pages, so the incomplete sentence blank, it doesn't matter which one you're in, it will have the same bar, and you would just want to click on Mark Review as complete. If you needed to do the opposite and reopen a review, then you would just click it again, and it'll mark it as incompleted. The other thing, we've been hearing people wanting to know about follow-up and were they certified or not. The other thing you can do is you can click on Open Profile, and that will actually show you the candidate's profile. This is also where you go to get contact information for the candidate. So if you wanted to call and schedule their assessment interview, you can click on Open Profile. It'll take you to their personal information page. Frequently asked questions, because that's all fine and dandy if it all works great. We all know from using this program, that happens probably 50% of the time. So we kind of touched on this a little bit. Can someone other than the mentor proctor the psychological assessment? Yeah. You can still have proctors. You just need to assign them as a mentor. I usually say assign them as a courtesy mentor to the candidate's record, and then make sure in that request assessment materials step that that's the person you're selecting. One thing to keep in mind, if you keep adding proctors, those people are going to continue to show up on your mentor list within UMCares. So I always say cautiously, yes, anyone can do it. Make sure you inactivate them if they're only for that candidate once it's done. And then, are the assessment links sent automatically from UMCares? No, they're not. At this point, they actually come from me, so estabars-skur@gbhgm.org. They may very soon start coming from candidacy@gbhgm.org or assessment@gbhgm.org. I haven't really decided which one they're going to come from. But it does take usually 2 to 3 business days for me to get those out. If someone requested it before that and they still don't have them, please have them reach out to me. It may be that we had their email address wrong. It may be that it was submitted incorrectly or some other reason why they didn't go out. And then, are the assessment links individualized? Maybe. The quick answer is if they're doing the battery in English, no, it's the same for everybody. However, if your annual conference uses Dr. Martha Hinkle, there is a third piece of the battery that is not used by anybody else. Those links are individualized. It's not for the MMPI-2 or the 16PF, that's the same link for everyone, but that third piece is, which is why we still send them out manually. The other reason is the 16PF in Spanish has individualized access codes still at this point. The English ones do not, but the Spanish does. They're actually on 2 different websites, which is why we can't do the Spanish just with the same link. Now, the MMPI-2, I do want to point this out. It is available in English and Spanish from the same link. There is actually a language option at the very top in the right-hand corner. They just choose between English and Spanish once they've logged in. Otherwise, like I said, links are not unique to people and they no longer expire, which I know has been an issue in the past, that we would have codes that were only valid through May of 2017, and if your candidacy summit was in June, half of your codes would be expired, half of them wouldn't be. That's no longer an issue. They don't expire. Our credits expire, but that link no longer expires, so y'all don't have to take on that burden. That's for us to worry about. Can candidates go back and update their PDI if they took a break from the process and say it's been 4 years, so the information's no longer up to date? No, they'll have to start over. If you request for me to reopen a PDI and I tell you I have to reset it, I will actually ask for written confirmation from the candidate that they want me to reset that form, simply because it is so intensive. That's just so everyone is in agreement. They understand that everything they put in there is going to be erased and they'll have to start all over. So I really try to discourage that at all possible. But in some cases, I know that MASs don't want an addendum attached, they want it redone, which is their prerogative. And then how much does it cost per candidate? So traditionally, if you don't use this for psychological assessment, the candidacy fee is $45. If you use GBHEM for psych assessment, the candidacy fee is raised to $75, and that's just to cover the cost of the battery. And now I'm going to open it up for your questions. I know I ran through that pretty quickly. But please feel free to come to the microphones, ask me any questions. And I also have UMCares pulled up if I need to live demo anything.
Yes. Someone mentioned yesterday the seminary student norms for the MMPI-2. I would like to second that motion, and is there a way we can get that data from the MMPI-2?
The technical answer is yes, there is a way. That would have to be voted on by the ACCCA committee.
Okay. Well, I would just
I operate within their
discussion
guidelines.
of that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we will. We will continue discussion of that. Anybody else? Oh, here we go.
Why use UMCares? Because currently we don't, and I'm just curious, tell me why.
So there's a variety of reasons why different annual conferences use our system. One of the things that has been really well received is the References 360 that is included within our psychological assessment track. The other reason that I hear often is that they were doing the exact same battery with their MAS already, so it just made sense. But without knowing each individual conference's reason, GBHM is not really invested in getting you all to use us. It's a service we offer if you want to use it. If not, our feelings are not hurt. Sure.
Great idea.
Like, I don't want to speak for you guys for why you want to use it.
As an MAS, one of the things I like is I can't lose paper. The other thing is that I can pull it up wherever I am. I can use my iPad, I can use my computer, I can pull it up, because I can always get to the website on any smartphone or, so everything's there. I know it's all in. I don't have to keep tracking paper. I like it a lot better.
I've had several clients that were Spanish speaking and their data came to me in Spanish. I neither speak nor read Spanish. And so I have no information for their personal data form or their sentence completion. Is there something we can do about that?
Meg? I'm gonna let Meg speak to this one.
The challenge is, I mean, as you know, when you translate an instrument, it's not a straight translation, it's also contextual. So when we provide an MMPI and 16PF in a language other than English, we need the annual conference to ensure that there is a psychologist who can understand the context from which that candidate comes and can read those results. It's not a straight translation, and I'm looking at some of my committee to look at that, but it's contextual, and people who think in Spanish think differently than people who think in English. So we do not have the way in our office to provide translation, so the annual conference needs to take that responsibility.
It's not the inventory. It's the personal data form, the sentence completion that remains in Spanish, and I cannot.
Right, so your conference needs to find someone who can translate those.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So Sarah, as you know, we don't use you currently.
Right.
I had a question about when you do group mentoring, group proctoring. So if we had like 40 in a group that was being proctored at the same time, how does the group proctoring report have to be done? Does it have to be reported for every single candidate individually? How is that done?
Yes. Now, we did make that easier for the proctors. Any field that can be auto-populated with your information is auto-populated. So thank you, Indiana, for being my guinea pigs on this one. They were my first summit to do this. They actually went in and they did the monitors agreements the day before, but they emailed the candidates ahead of time saying, do not start that incomplete sentence blank until you are present at the summit. I've had other summits do it the day before or 2 days before, but they're already at the summit, the candidates are, so they weren't worried about them jumping in and doing it. Now, the testing situation report, that has to be completed for each candidate, and the only information that's going to be pre-populated is the proctor's information. Everything else you'll have to do, if there's nothing of interest, for 3/4 of the questions, you're going to have to type nothing of interest for every single one of the candidates. Now, I have noticed in the summit situations, I still get those testing situation reports. If they had to summit on Saturday, I usually have it by Tuesday morning for all the candidates. So it doesn't seem to be too much of a hindrance, because I was worried about that exact thing. Is there anyone here who did a summit with this? Do you want to speak to that?
Yes, Great Plains uses this at a summit format, and I will usually get folks started on the MMPI 16PF stuff. While they're doing that, that gives me plenty of time to go in and do the monitor's agreement for everybody, opening up the incomplete sentence blank in the process. And then as far as the monitor's testing, I basically keep a spreadsheet of everybody because I make them check out. We do it at the end of our summit. And at that point, and as I'm monitoring the testing, I'm making notes in the spreadsheet if there's anything that I need to include in the testing report. And then, yeah, depending on how quickly I want to get on the road, how far away I am from home, it may show up within 24 hours, but I have that spreadsheet that I've been making notes on to use, so.
Yeah, and with the summit, I will usually wait a business day or two before I even go in to start scoring the assessments, just to give the proctors time to wrap up all the loose ends. Any other questions? If you think of something after this session, during the breakout sessions later this morning, I'll actually be out at the registration table with my laptop. If you have individual questions about a particular situation, I'll be out there. You can come meet with me. I'll do kind of little office hours for everyone. Because I know sometimes your question's not really appropriate for the whole group. But yeah, I will be out there, I'll be present. And if you feel you need further training after this, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to set up a Zoom meeting. We can go over additional training on any part of UMCares that you would like to see. Thank you all.